I am proud to create him Prince of Wales, Tywysog Cymru, the country whose title I've been so greatly privileged to bear during so much of my life and duty. Behind closed doors, King Charles has effectively rewritten the rules of the palace. Within the most exclusive corridors of King Charles III's inner sanctum, a stunning directive has just leaked. A priceless, multi-generational collection of diamond brooches is being systemically reassigned to Catherine, sparking instant, frantic speculation among royal insiders everywhere. Why this sudden move? And what does this pivotal decision reveal about Queen Camilla's actual status within the modern hierarchy? Stay with us as we unpack the historic choice that has sent shockwaves through the royal community. The conference that altered the future. King Charles was seated silently alongside institutional trustees and top-tier counselors when the confidential session commenced. To any casual observer looking in from the courtyard, it merely resembled a routine briefing on domestic administration, the precise type of bureaucratic assembly that regularly occurs within a functional monarchy, highly organized, traditional, and entirely hidden from the public eye beyond the massive stone gates. Yet those who truly comprehend the inner mechanics of the British monarchy recognized this was a major departure. The underlying tension filling the room was far from standard administrative business. It bore that rare, profound gravity that only emerges when the conversation pivots to dynastic succession, ancestral inheritance, or the type of monumental decision destined to outlive every single individual seated at the table. At the absolute heart of this intense debate was Camilla's signature brooch collection, a magnificent array of historic jewelry that had become synonymous with her public persona throughout her decades-long partnership with Charles. On the 9th of April, 2005, Charles and Camilla married in a civil ceremony. These specific items had been prominently featured during momentous state functions, at crucial national events, at the exact type of high-profile gatherings where a royal's wardrobe communicates far more eloquently than any spoken address. These precious gems were never mere fashion statements. They served as undeniable visual proclamations of status, legitimacy, and institutional rank. Catherine had been unexpectedly called into this high-stakes meeting. According to individuals intimately familiar with the palace environment, she was completely blindsided by the monumental scale of the announcement she was about to receive. The sovereign had arrived at an unyielding, private verdict. Particular heirloom pieces within the grand collection were fundamentally tied not to personal sentimentality or marital gifts, but to paramount constitutional obligation and dynastic longevity. And through that strict ideological lens, the final verdict had already been cemented. By the moment Catherine exited the chamber, the official paperwork that palace administrators had reportedly finalized prior to her arrival was already circulating through a tight network of trusted confidants. Executive assistants who recognized the true gravity of such paperwork understood the reality instantly. This strategic move had not materialized that morning. It had been meticulously organized behind the scenes for months, perhaps even longer, structured quietly in the shadows while the external world observed the royal family executing their standard public duties. By nightfall, the intense rumors whispering through the grand palace corridors had radically evolved. Courtiers were no longer debating whether the reassignment would occur. Instead, they were frantically questioning why Catherine and why Charles had determined this specific time to establish such a rigid, unapologetic boundary between personal devotion and institutional responsibility. And beneath that flurry of anxious inquiries lay the far more uncomfortable question that no one in those grand halls dared to articulate directly. What were the long-term implications for Camilla? The true meaning behind the crown jewels. The historic diamond brooches did not capture global headlines because of their staggering monetary worth or their exquisite craftsmanship. They took center stage because of their symbolic power in the unspoken vocabulary that royal households have traditionally utilized to telegraph realities they cannot openly broadcast to global media outlets. For centuries, sovereign jewelry has never functioned as simple decoration. A historic piece pinned to a gown during a state banquet can convey vastly more than an official press release from the palace. An heirloom displayed at the precise moment signals institutional backing, profound approval, and unyielding allegiance. Conversely, an item withheld, reassigned, or transferred into alternative hands broadcasts a completely different reality. Every individual brooch within Camilla's rotation possessed deep historical resonance. A number of them had been featured during solemn commemorations of national mourning. Others had been prominently displayed during those slow, incredibly grueling decades when she was transforming her public image from the most polarizing figure in modern royal history into the nation's recognized queen. Camilla, the most controversial person among the monarchs, each heirloom had become intrinsically linked with a definitive era of that arduous path, and showcasing them had been a deliberate strategy employed by the palace to steadily craft a narrative of public reconciliation and acceptance. This was the exact dilemma that had been quietly brewing among elite royal traditionalists for a considerable duration. Were these magnificent treasures personal assets belonging exclusively to the woman who wore them and the private partnership she shared with Charles? Or did they belong to a much grander legacy, functioning as property of the crown and part of the permanent sovereign infrastructure that outlasts any single generation utilizing it? Within the rigid framework of the monarchy, such a dilemma is never purely academic. Personal tokens stay with the individual. Crown heirlooms follow the path of sovereign duty, and the moment that uncompromising standard is directed towards a specific vault, the ensuing debate ceases to be a private domestic affair. It instantly transforms into an official constitutional procedure with sweeping long-term ramifications. Throughout this delicate process, Catherine's title began to carry an entirely new level of institutional significance. She was the Princess of Wales. With Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales, I know. She was increasingly viewed by palace officials, as well as the global public observing from afar, as the ultimate custodian of the monarchy's emotional connection with the people, the specific individual designated to project its image into the coming era. A woman who had proven, through more than a decade of flawlessly disciplined and quietly resilient public service, that she thoroughly grasped the heavy demands of the crown and was entirely prepared to meet them. And once that consensus solidified during the formal audit of the royal vault, certain institutional conclusions became completely unavoidable. Camilla's current standing and the mounting institutional pressure surrounding her inner circle. Camilla's journey to the pinnacle of the royal hierarchy had never been seamless. She had spent a generation navigating the hostile waters of public disapproval, bearing the immense burden of a position that the British populace initially flatly rejected. The evolution from that cold starting point to the rank of queen consort was incredibly grueling. Camilla is now the queen. Kind of. The new king's darling wife has become the queen consort. And at every critical juncture of that evolution, she required the fierce defense and unwavering institutional backing of Charles. He had stood resolutely by her side through years of intense public skepticism. He had systematically navigated her path towards mainstream validation, one calculated, highly managed public engagement at a time. He had watched her transform steadily, overcoming immense institutional and societal opposition, into a central sovereign figure whom the public eventually came to treat with genuine deference. That transformation was undeniable, and it demanded a tremendous personal sacrifice from both of them to achieve it. Yet, within the palace walls, public acceptance and genuine institutional authority have never been synonymous. Acceptance simply guaranteed her a physical place at the table. True authority meant she possessed the power to dictate the future direction of the family, and as the vital matter of succession architecture became impossible to push aside within the administrative offices of the royal household, those two distinct concepts began to fracture in ways that no one could successfully halt. William and Catherine's profile across the broader socioeconomic landscape had been expanding dramatically with every passing year, not through aggressive self-promotion or overt political maneuvers that could be easily intercepted and shut down, but quietly, continuously, in the inevitable manner that tomorrow always overrides today as the clock moves forward. They embodied the definitive next chapter of the monarchy, and in a dynastic system anchored entirely on continuity, the next reign always commands the ultimate priority in the room, even when it is not the one currently occupying the throne. Camilla's fiercest advocates within the palace had observed this generational shift with growing trepidation. To them, the historic brooch collection represented a tangible, highly visible validation of her elevated rank. These were iconic pieces she displayed on the world stage. For Charles, the reality of the situation was extraordinarily brutal. He was not navigating a personal conflict between two women he cherished. He was caught in a profound struggle between his deepest personal emotions as a man and his sworn constitutional obligations as a sovereign. Those two worlds had rarely experienced such a violent collision. The legal declarations were finalized and the immediate orders were issued. The closed-door conference was officially called, and when Catherine stepped out of the chamber, holding the reality of what she had just been assigned, the Rubicon had officially been crossed. What had been debated in absolute privacy was already actively altering the structural landscape of the institution itself, and the initial shockwaves were only just beginning to reverberate through the rest of the royal household. The immediate fallout within the royal household. The precise instant this sensitive information began leaking through the various branches of the palace staff, the internal environment shifted overnight. Conversations abruptly terminated the second specific names were mentioned in passing. Political alliances that had appeared rock solid for nearly 2 decades began to fracturing at the margins. Seasoned courtiers who recognized the inner workings of royal administration understood exactly what was unfolding, long before any formal press release materialized to validate it. Within the palace ecosystem, silence speaks volumes. A calculated hint dropped in a quiet corridor, an uncharacteristic hesitation when the royal vault is brought up, an administrator lowering their tone in spaces where they previously spoke freely. These are the classic omens that forecast major institutional realignments in a dynasty that has always preferred to let its true intentions manifest through environmental tension rather than explicit verbal declarations. Camilla's internal faction detected this shift long before an official document arrived to spell it out. The realization that an incredibly meaningful symbol of her status was being systematically redirected away from her reached her inner circle through these precise atmospheric shifts, not via a dramatic confrontation, a formal letter, or an official briefing, but through the specific brand of nervous anxiety that infiltrates a household when a definitive choice has been finalized and the only remaining variable is the manner of its execution. Palace aides processed this monumental development in wildly divergent ways. A segment of the staff viewed the realignment as entirely inevitable, a difficult but necessary step that the natural trajectory of the monarchy had rendered unavoidable for years. Others were deeply affected by the profound emotional toll it would inflict on Camilla, whose modern identity had been painstakingly built around the deliberate showcasing of these exact heirlooms during the most critical chapters of recent royal history. Independent royal commentators outside the palace walls immediately shifted their analysis toward the ceremonial fallout. If Catherine emerged as the designated guardian of pieces formerly synonymous with Camilla, then every future state visit or international gala would carry an explosive subtext. An iconic brooch that had been displayed by Camilla during a historic national moment, suddenly reappearing on Catherine at a future function, would transcend fashion. It would serve as a powerful act of nonverbal communication, the exact type of message the palace specializes in sending without ever issuing a public quote. Camilla's vocal loyalists observed this looming reality with genuine dread. Catherine's camp viewed it as the ultimate validation of a generational transition that had been building momentum for over a decade. The deep ideological rift between these two interpretations intensified the internal friction within the court in ways that became increasingly difficult for senior managers to suppress. Beyond the immediate gossip, the macro-level importance of this reported directive was becoming blindingly obvious to all serious observers. This was never a simple case of domestic asset reallocation. It was a clear, calculated message regarding the future trajectory of the House of Windsor, broadcast through the most permanent symbolic medium at the monarchy's disposal. And once that definitive signal was sent to the world, the question of what other future transitions had already been finalized in that same covert manner became impossible to ignore. The massive expectations placed upon Catherine and the true nature of this inheritance. For Catherine, this historic transfer was never going to be experienced as a simple cosmetic upgrade. The priceless artifacts she was being instructed to take over were far from basic additions to her personal jewelry box. They functioned as physical fragments of a complex, highly sensitive era of modern history, weighted down by the personal legacy of the woman who had previously worn them, and the decades those pieces spent serving as visual tools to help rehabilitate the modern image of the monarchy itself. Inheriting them meant willingly accepting the intense public scrutiny attached to their legacy. Every future appearance where these diamonds are displayed will be minutely dissected by global media. Every strategic choice regarding when to showcase them and when to keep them locked away in a vault will carry massive symbolic weight. Even her silence on the matter will be heavily interpreted. These historic gems will not simply sit passively in her collection. They will actively shape the ongoing global conversation regarding her identity, her character, and the specific vision of the monarchy she is preparing to champion. Became destined to be the future Queen of England. She had spent her entire public life constructing her reputation through precisely this brand of meticulous, disciplined navigation. The incredible self-restraint she has consistently exhibited in her public capacity, her unyielding dedication to prioritizing institutional obligation over personal ego, and her innate understanding of the profound weight of the symbols already resting on her shoulders, these were the exact criteria that senior advisors selected when the review reached its final conclusion. Yet, understanding a concept intellectually and physically receiving the historical artifacts that embody that reality are two fundamentally different human experiences. Those brooches were far from abstract theories. They were physical realities with complicated backgrounds, active former owners, and immediate ramifications for every future public appearance she makes. The underlying mandate this transfer imposed upon Catherine was the exact opposite of what it appeared to give her on the surface. It demanded that she showcase immense beauty without letting it resemble a personal conquest, that she inherit a complicated history without appearing to celebrate the transition, and that she carry visual symbols recently synonymous with a living rival in a manner that respects that history rather than attempts to erase it from the archive. The operational standard the palace has set for her leaves absolutely zero margin for error. Yet, that is precisely why this momentous decision has solidified her status in the eyes of veteran royal analysts. The palace never delegates highly complex, high-stakes assignments to individuals it harbors doubts about. The sheer institutional weight of what has been placed into her custody is the ultimate endorsement of the absolute trust driving the decision.
Concurrently, Charles had arrived at the exact psychological crossroads that every ruler must eventually confront: the painful reality where personal devotion as a husband and institutional obligation as a king diverge completely. He had spent a lifetime protecting Camilla's position in the public square through periods of unprecedented hostility. He had stood fiercely by her side through systemic scandals that would have completely dismantled a less resilient marriage. He had successfully guided her path until she became the recognized queen consort by his side. And then, the uncompromising nature of the crown demanded that he look past all that history, evaluate the visual symbols of the institution he is bound to protect, and determine who must hold them when his own time on the throne concludes. That question yielded only one logical conclusion, and that conclusion had already been executed before the vast majority of palace insiders even realized the process had begun. The permanent message behind the diamonds. Eventually, the intense public debate surrounding these brooches will quiet down. The media frenzy will fade. The internal court disagreements, to whatever degree they transpired, will eventually stabilize into the type of accepted institutional reality that ceases to draw comment once it has been established long enough. Yet this pivotal moment will remain forever etched in the history of the court, because this saga was never truly about precious stones. It was about the historic milestone when a sitting king stopped merely managing his contemporary reality and began actively orchestrating the future of his dynasty. It was about the moment when symbols of sovereign power moved from one set of hands to another because the longevity of the institution demanded it. It highlighted the specific, brutal demand that the crown imposes on everyone who sits on the throne, the unyielding obligation to serve what outlasts you rather than what comforts you in the present. Catherine steps forward bearing far more than just historic diamonds. She carries the immense institutional expectations